Hi, my name is VG, and welcome to Surviving Religious Narcissism. This is a community in which we discuss surviving and healing from religious narcissistic abuse, more specifically church abuse. Today I want to talk about toxic faith and the unanswered prayers of survivors. But first, I want to give a trigger warning because a lot of what I share in this video is sensitive in nature. For those of us who had grown up in the church, who have grown up in the faith, we're not allowed to admit it, but there are so many unanswered prayers in our lives. If we're honest, there may be valleys of unanswered prayers in our lives, and it can be a very embittering feeling because many of us would have left a toxic relationship or a toxic situation years, maybe even decades sooner, had we known that our prayers wouldn't be answered. It can leave us just questioning ourselves, wondering how things got so bad, how we could have spent so much of our lives sacrificing and serving the church and doing what we thought was right, and then ending up driving on an empty tank. I understand that narcissism is the buzzword of our generation, and a lot of pastors and preachers and Bible teachers have also adapted the conversation on narcissism into their teachings. However, a mistake that many of them make, or at least it's my opinion that it's a mistake, is talking about narcissism as though it were a spirit. And I don't want to challenge or disparage anybody's spiritual beliefs or views. That's not what I want to do. However, it is a problem because it misleads many people into thinking that they can pray it away. There are no known cases in which someone was able to pray away narcissism. Narcissism is a personality type, and it's a rigid personality type. Narcissists don't change, and if they do change, that change doesn't last very long. I had a Christian friend who was in a terrible marriage. Her husband was a pastor's son, and he was emotionally, verbally, mentally abusing her, even physically abusing her. And he was behaving in ways to trigger her and then make her look crazy to everybody else. She was telling me all about it. And then she shared with me that she chose to stay with him because she was so sure that if she prayed hard enough, that God would perform a miracle in her marriage, that God would change him. She had gone to her pastor for counsel, and I know that all pastors aren't like this, and I know that all churches aren't like this, but her pastor did what many pastors do and told her to submit more, to be obedient to her husband, to be submissive, to, cook home-cooked meals, to do everything she can to be the perfect wife so as to melt the heart of this man, because then God would reward her with restoration in her marriage. Now, we know this is ridiculous. It's no more than superstition and magical thinking. If you reward bad behavior, you're just going to get more bad behavior. But unfortunately for my friend, she did buy into this deranged fairy tale, and she kept being disappointed over and over again. I asked her, if you know that the next 5 years, the next 10 years, the next 20 years would be just as bad or maybe even worse, then would you stay? And she really didn't want to talk about it because, of course, she had really banked on a miracle. Well, one day she called me ecstatic. She had believed that God actually performed the miracle in her marriage because she reached a point where she actually thought that there was no saving this marriage. At which point her husband did a very predictable thing that abusers do, was that he rebounded back into the relationship. He told her that he loves her. I'm sorry. This time things will be different. Don't give up on me. And she was so happy because she thought that this was her miracle. But I was concerned. I was concerned because their relationship had experienced the cycle before. And like I said, it's a very predictable pattern with narcissistic abusers. Narcissists usually start with a love bomb. They put you on this high pedestal. They let you know how wonderful you are. They do these grandiose gestures to really win you over. But once you fall for them, they start to devalue you. They start to mistreat you. When the relationship ends, whether you end it or they end it, there's a discard. After that discard, if your abuser doesn't come back for another round, consider yourself very blessed. It doesn't feel like that, but you're lucky. Because very often abusers will come back with a Hoover. When they come back with the Hoover, it's that I love you, baby. I can't live without you. I can do better. I can be better. And then what happens? The love bombing starts again. Back in the day, in the context of DV, I remember they used to call this the honeymoon phase of a relationship. Now we talk about love bombing because we keep talking about narcissism, and that's a very familiar term now. But once you're back in that love bombing phase, you feel incredible again. It is better than any drug. And here she was back in that love bombing phase telling me it happened, I got my miracle, and now I really know what the joy of the Lord feels like. I've seen this happen so many times in Christian marriages, within religious circles, that a victim, when they get hoovered and that love bombing starts again, they really believe that they got their marriage miracle. They really believe that what they're experiencing is the joy of the Lord, because we had been trained to believe that. Good people make mistakes in relationships. I get that. But when you're dealing with a narcissist, when you're dealing with an abuser, they're not going to change. People who lack empathy don't show meaningful changes. And if they do, those changes don't last very long. I'm not saying don't pray. Prayer can be a very grounding and healing experience for a lot of people. But it will never be a tool to control or change another person. This abusive relationship cycle doesn't only occur in romantic relationships. It can occur in any kind of relationship with a narcissist. It can be a boss, it can be a best friend, it could be a family member. My first narcissist, unfortunately, was my mother. And if you've seen my previous videos, you would know that I went through a very severe trauma within the church, and I'll share a little bit more about that now. The family member who had abused me was my adoptive stepfather, and both my pastor and my mother covered it up. My mother, after I had come forward, saw me as the enemy. She saw me as the person who was devastating her happiness, not her husband who did the horrible thing. And my pastor, he was mostly just a pawn in her hand, and he did tell her, and I'll never agree with this, and not all churches believe this, but he told her that it would be a sin to divorce her husband. So she stuck it out with him. I mean, and she wanted him. She has a very codependent personality, and she can't really live without a man, or she doesn't think that she can. So she started the smear campaign against me. She started mentally abusing me and harassing me, breaking down my mental health, making me look crazy to everybody. She was telling people bad things about me, and she was even recruiting other people who I had once trusted, into the whole smear campaign and bullying and mental harassment that she had orchestrated. Now, she's somebody who looks like a delicate rose, or acts like a delicate rose, but underneath the surface, she is a master manipulator. And she did all of this to protect her husband and her marriage and what she felt was the family reputation. In time, she did move on. He and her, they did move on to start their own church and start their own ministry, which was devastating to me because it struck me that I had come forward and I did what I needed to do, and it didn't change anything. I was under the naive assumption that if I'd come forward, I did go to the police and everything, and nobody cared. And I had thought that if I had come forward, it would be like in the TV shows, that there'd be this whole investigation and a criminal lawsuit and all kinds of stuff that never happened. Yet, despite the severity of the betrayal, anytime that she would pretend that she was sorry and wanted to reconcile, I would believe her and go running back into her arms, only to be betrayed again. The final hoover was when I was really sick. I was suffering severely from a chronic illness. I wasn't able to take care of myself because of how sick I was. During that time, my mother promised me that she'd keep her husband out of the house, and she convinced me to come back home, and that way she could help me. And at first, she was incredibly generous. Any generosity that a narcissist shows you is transactional. They're going to want something in return. But again, I was being naive. I don't really blame myself because, there's nothing wrong with wanting and needing the love of a mother. I also didn't know about narcissism in those days. So I went home, and initially I was very grateful. But then the devaluing did start again, and it was devastating when I realized that she and her husband were plotting the whole time and they had set a trap for me. So at some point, he did come to the house in a fit of rage against me. He had confronted me, and I left my home, my mother's home rather, in crisis, in a condition where I was still too sick to take care of myself. And after that, I realized that I was never going to reconcile with this woman and that she was never going to change. And that's what really opened my eyes that, people like her don't change. But I was especially vulnerable, not just because I longed for and needed the love of a mother, but I also had this religious indoctrination that told me that no matter what, you always have to forgive. No matter what, you always have to seek reconciliation. And if you pray enough, and if you have enough faith, God will perform that miracle. And I really, really believed that there was going to be this miracle in my family, and that miracle never came. So I'm a houseplant hobbyist. My home is full of beautiful houseplants, and I'll explain why this is relevant. There is a wonderful lesson that I learned. I do believe that nature teaches us all kinds of wonderful things, and I learned this wonderful lesson through this hobby about narcissistic abuse and breaking free, and I'll show you what I mean. If you have a plant like this, and the roots inside of the pot are rotten, in time the whole plant will die. But you're not going to realize right away. The symptoms show afterwards. So by the time you notice, it's usually too late because there's no cure for rotten plant roots. And what will happen is eventually all these leaves will start to turn yellow and start to die off. The only way to save a plant, if you have root rot, is by cutting off any of the healthy pieces that haven't started to rot yet, and putting them in water or in moist soil and giving them some sunlight. And when we do that, what happens is that those cuttings start to grow new roots in time, and then you can plant that piece and it will start a new plant. However, if you don't cut any of that plant away, the entire thing does die. So many of our prayers went unanswered. They were never meant to be answered. Those prayers, the answers for those prayers, could have never been realized because they were attached to rotten roots, and we didn't know any better because we were indoctrinated with bad theology. We were trained to have an unshakable faith, like Abraham and Sarah. But sometimes even an unshakable faith is maladaptive. Maladaptive behaviors prevent us from being able to adapt, adjust, and participate in life. We stay in bad relationships and toxic relationships because we have faith. Faith that things will get better. Faith that things will change. If we just hold on a little tighter, if we just pray a little harder, if we just fast one more fast, we're going to get our breakthrough. But the reality is that it's not faith that keeps us bound to toxic people and toxic environments. It's fear. And then we mask that fear and we call it faith. We can use faith in a different way. We can say, I'm in a bad situation and I'm going to get out. And I have no idea what's going to happen. Yet I have the faith that I'll make it. I have the faith that I'm strong. I have the faith that I'll survive. I have the faith that I will thrive because I deserve better than this. This kind of faith is not passive, it is proactive, and it gives us the type of hope that can be realized. In my opinion, in my experience, it is a profound and beautiful expression and experience of true spirituality. I can't say that life on the other side of spiritual abuse, religious abuse, church abuse, I can't say that it's perfect, because if I said that, I'd be lying. But I can honestly say that it is 100 times better than anything and everything that I left behind. So that's what I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I would love to hear from you. I know for survivors, safety often is a huge issue. So if you are safe and you feel safe, please do comment below. Have you been disappointed or disillusioned by faith and prayer and the faith community? If so, how have you been coping? How have you been healing? And what is your advice to other people who are also going through the same or similar things? If you benefited from this content and if it resonates with you in any way, please do like and please do subscribe. It would make a huge difference for me. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next one.